Gwilym Roberts, I haven't seen you since we had a little evening out in London almost a couple of weeks ago now. How are you?
I can't very well. What are you talking about? What are you talking about, Lee?
Well, I don't have a vivid memory of it, I have to say. Events past about 11:30 at night are lost to me now, but we just bumped into one another somewhere, didn't we? When we were in a hotel?
Oh, hang on. There's
something.
Something happened.
Do you want me to just jog your memory a little bit by just reaching onto my mantelpiece and bringing this into camera shot?
Look at the size of that giant glass brick. Yes.
Shall I read out what it says?
Go on then.
It's the Memcom Awards for Membership Excellence, and it's Best Podcast to the Chartered Institute of Patent Attorneys.
Oh, that? Yeah, no, yeah, I remember now. Slipped my mind. Who knew?
It was good evening, wasn't it?
It was fabulous. It wasn't our only award as well.
It wasn't our only award. Producer Fran won Outstanding Contribution to a Membership Organisation. So well deserved as well. Fran's been with SEPA forever, and I've seen her sort of spread her wings in all sorts of different ways over the last decade or so since I've been with SEPA, and there is no better winner of an award than Fran in my book.
No, although you would have thought on the night that Dwayne won the award, because I think he absolutely had written on it by the end of it.
Unfortunately, Fran couldn't make it to our gig, so her boss, Dwayne Hamilton, looked after the picking up, and it was exactly as if he won an award. It's all over the show. I thought you looked lovely in your green spangly jacket and glittery shirt.
People didn't pick up on the shirts, actually, because I think the jacket was a little bit... I'm just going to repeat the thing I keep saying about that jacket, which is I love the laundry instructions, which when you opened it, it simply said, "Do not wash." Summed up that piece of clothing really nicely.
Lee Davis and Gwilym Roberts are the two IPs in a pod, and you are listening to a podcast on intellectual property, brought to you by the Chartered Institute of Patent Attorneys.
I know, it was good. I was explaining to Fran when we were waiting for you to join us. They read out the award of highly recommended, but then I think it was about 3 words in when we realised that it was ours. It was something like a pair of genial hosts, and we were like, yes! Still might not have been us, but we were.
Didn't even mention the tortoise. I don't know what's going on.
We were up and dancing. Yeah, congratulations, mate. You thoroughly deserved it.
And to you, boss. It's been brilliant.
Should we crack on and do today's one then?
Go on.
Let's welcome back to the podcast, June Dent. June's an old friend of the podcast now. Hiya, June. How are you?
Hi, thank you for inviting me. Yeah, I'm fine, thank you.
You are, but you might not realise this, but you are the first guest on the award-winning 2 IPs in a pod.
I did realise, yes, and congratulations to you both, and to Fran, of course.
You've come back to us to give us a bit of a mental health update, because of course it was about 6-7 months ago we did a piece with you and a couple of colleagues about all things mental health, and just a little bit of an explanation. We should have recorded this podcast a few days back and got it out in time for Mental Health Day, which was was it the 10th? Yesterday? Was it yesterday?
Sunday.
Sunday. But unfortunately, we had a little bit of a glitch when Lucy, who looks after recordings, was ill, and Fran was off celebrating amazing awards. So we didn't get it done last week. So we're doing it the day after. But we'll get it out as quickly as we can. Mental health in an unequal world. What's that mean?
Well, it's drawing attention this year to the fact that, mental health affects different people differently and not in equal ways. It used to be said that it was an equal opportunities disorder, but it really isn't. And it's also drawing attention to the fact that it's not always equal the way that we can access help for the problems we might encounter. So I wanted to say a bit about, what do we know about which groups are more likely to be affected by problems with their well-being or indeed mental health disorders, and again what we might do about it in the workplace.
I had my own little bit of experience with the inequalities that are around mental health. She won't mind me talking about it, but my youngest daughter Evie, she's just turned 14. She's had a really, really tough time over the last year or so for a range of reasons. The fact that she's just become a teenager, the fact that she's been struggling to deal with kind of lockdowns and pandemics and things like that, and those kinds of things. Yeah, she's had a really, really tough time. I won't go into the kind of gory details of what's been happening, but it meant that we had to try and get her some help and support. And I found out for the first time how difficult it is for young people to access mental health services. Didn't stop us. We just kind of dip your finger in your wallet and pay for it and get stuff sorted. But if we had been sort of solely dependent on what was available through the GP and stuff like that, it's sort of dread to think really where we might have been.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. I hope she's getting good help soon.
Oh no, she's much better.
Good. No, I mean it's been brought into highlight in this last 18 months really, just how problematic it is. And having worked in the health service for many years, I know how difficult it is having to tell people that they have to wait for treatment and getting the right sort of help in the right place. But it is worth the wait. It is worth getting treatment, not giving up on pursuing treatment when you need it.
So tell us a little bit about the sort of work that you're involved in currently, June, and how that relates to Mental Health Day.
Yeah, so I'm working at Jonathan's Voice. Perhaps I should have mentioned that before. A charity that you're familiar with, and we're particularly interested in helping individuals in their workplace, but in all of their lives, think about best ways of looking after their mental health, promoting their well-being, and also in helping organisations, particularly in the IP sector, to really provide the sort of work that we might call good work. So the sort of environment and culture where well-being is important, and all employees are treated well and encouraged to help each other, and particularly line managers and supervisors and directors are having an eye out, making sure that there are really good working practices, and we're stamping out the ones that we know are unhelpful to mental health. So that's what we're aiming to do in Jonathan's Voice. I thought I'd just say a bit about the inequalities that are very evident at the moment.
Oh, please do.
So I'm going to say a bit about, in general, what it's been like for some years, kind of known research, but also say a bit about the Law Care report that came out last week, which gives us a snapshot of what was going on between October last year, January this year in the law profession, and what the kind of big issues there. And so shall I start with the kind of general thing that, just about how unequal is that the most important and standout thing for us, which is a charity that was set up following the death of Jonathan McCartney by suicide, is to think about how unequal it is that so many more men die of suicide than women. 3 times as many men die of suicide than women, which is, sort of staggering, and to the extent that it's the highest cause of death among men between 35 and 49. So it's a really sort of standout figure. And yet, on the other hand, women have far higher levels of reported mental health problems, in particular anxiety and depression and stress, than men. So there's this sort of paradox, which means, what does it mean in the workplace? It means that we have to look out for everybody. We have to look out for men who might not be wanting to talk so much about their problems, and certainly don't access help anywhere near as much as women do. And we also need to look out for women. So we've got to kind of hold both in mind. So although those facts are really important, actually, what it means is we need to listen out for everybody equally. So some of the other groups that are affected differently, it's to do with age. So we know that younger people, not just children, but younger people in the early stages of their careers, so from 25 to 35 onwards, much more likely to be experiencing mental health problems than those in the older group. We know that people from Black and ethnic minority group are much more likely to be experiencing problems than people in the majority white grouping. We know that people from the LGBTQ community are much more likely to experience mental health problems than people from the straight community. So they're a group where we know that on average, there are differences, but that doesn't mean that in particular, each individual is more likely to. It just means that on average they are. And we kind of understand that as being because they have had to sometimes fight harder for their place in the workplace, that they have had to experience discrimination, and they've had to experience a great deal of stigma. So all of us with mental health problems have to, do experience stigma.
I'm pleased you mentioned the stigma word.
Yeah.
So let me just say a little bit about that, because IP is quite a high pressure environment to work within.
Yes.
And I'm imagining there's a lot of pressure on people to try and hide the issues that they might be having around their mental health. Is that something that you still find in the work that you do with Jonathan's Voice? Are things changing?
It's changing. Certainly in the last 3 or 4 years, when we go into workplaces, we know that more people are talking about mental health. And more managers know about mental health, more people are being trained to be aware and look after themselves but it's still a very large percentage of people who are reporting that they won't speak to their line manager. They wouldn't dream of talking to colleagues. So it's still over a half people who wouldn't want that to be known about them.
Is there an issue with kind of the age profile in terms of awareness? Is it, for example, the case that the older generation is less open to being approached about mental health discussions than the younger generation?
I mean, we hear that. Yeah, no, absolutely. That the younger generation are much more familiar with, how to look after themselves and what goes wrong when they don't. They're much more able to talk about anxiety and depression and stress. And presumably they know a lot more people who are anxious and depressed and stressed. We know in COVID, there's been a massive increase there's a doubling in the number of people who are depressed. So, across the general population, all of us are likely to know twice as many people who are depressed as we did before. But with young people, it can be 20, 30, 40% of people in the last year have been depressed. So that they will be more familiar with it from personal experience, but they're also more knowledgeable about it. And then when they're trying to, they're expecting to have conversations with people as old as me, then that, there might be barriers to do that.
I've had the chat from my son, actually. My lads are in their 20s, and I had low awareness, and I definitely come from a generation of a kind of a family background where it's not discussed, even though now when I look at what my grandmother went through, it's quite clear that she had a terrible, terrible time for about 20 years, as probably was the case in the 70s and 80s. I don't know. Yeah, my son came to me recently and said, Dad, if anyone does start talking to you about this, don't just write it off as a little wobble, please. The particular issue with those words, but also with the general principle. And so, I mean, I feel like we're being educated kind of upwards to a certain extent because of the good education this next generation's getting. Yes,
and of course it is confusing because we use the same sort of language for emotions that are part of everyday life. You kind of say, I'm feeling depressed, when you might mean you're feeling rather sad, or you might be feeling rather low, and it doesn't mean the same thing. Whereas perhaps the language for physical health problems, is separate. It's still much easier for us to talk about physical health than it is about mental health problems. But I think that's a really interesting thing for us to think about at work. The kind of benchmark is if you had a physical health problem that was making it difficult for you to sleep at night or get up in the morning or concentrate at work or be with other people at work, would you mention it to anybody at work? Probably you would. You'd say, I've got a really bad headache, or my back hurts, or, I have to sleep, or I'm not able to work because I'm so uncomfortable. I need to go to the doctor. I need to get some help. But we tend not to be so ready to say that about mental health. And then equally, if you're on the listening side of things, you might be asking, how are you, to somebody, but you're not picking up on the cues of not quite managing so well when it's a mental health problem. But that we offer in our training that we offer to people, we'd be often saying, when they say, well, I don't know how much to ask, I don't know how much to intrude, don't know how much to, how much it's my business or not. You can say, well, how much would you ask if it was a physical health problem? You don't need to know all the details. You just need to know enough about whether it's affecting their work and whether there's anything you as a manager can do about, or you as a colleague can help with. So you don't need to know what medication somebody is on, but do you need to know that they have thought about getting some help, or yes, they have seen their GP. So trying to get that parity with physical health, I think it's a really helpful rule to help people move their thinking on at work.
The how are you question is an interesting one, isn't it? I'm conscious that I say to Gwilym whenever we start a podcast off, how are you, mate? I don't actually mean how are you. I'm just saying hello.
I know you don't. Honestly, every time it's so shallow and empty, Lee. I know.
But it is an opportunity. If you say how are you to someone, it is an opportunity for them to start to open up. And I've had instances when people use that hook to say, well, actually, it's a bit rough at the moment, and then go on to say, I've done lots of training in this space. I know I always should be able to cope, but as a manager, as a leader, I don't always know what the right answers are, what the right things to say are. What support is there for us folk who are kind of trying to make organisations tick, June? What can we get access to?
Well, I think there's access to lots of really good training. There's written materials through Jonathan's Voice. We are very happy to come into workplaces and talk to managers and help them be more confident about having those conversations. The example you gave of talking to Gwilym, clearly you know each other very well. And so well, you're shaking your head, but you know each other well enough that if you picked up that he needed more of more of an answer than just "Are you all right, mate?" that you probably could say, "Oh, that doesn't sound too good. I can't talk now. We're making a recording, but can we talk to each other later? I'm concerned about you. Can we make some time?" So yeah, there's training, there's a lot of help around to help people get more confident, which isn't necessarily about just giving people facts. It's giving people the opportunity to ask questions about, but what if I put my foot in it? Will I make things worse? What am I allowed to do? What will the workplace allow me to say and not say? When what my boundaries should be. So the training would cover a lot of that, and it's not. We wouldn't recommend that that's something that you can just bish bash bosh do in 3/4 of an hour. It's quite often a longer training with other people from the company so that you can have opportunities of comparing helpful ways and not so helpful ways to ask, and to get a really honest and open conversation about what becomes the workplace business and what isn't the workplace business.
I know that you said when we were having a conversation before we started the podcast off that you're quite excited about the next booklet that Jonathan's Voice are putting out. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that? Because I think it's aimed at an area of the IP workforce that sometimes probably gets a little bit overlooked.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So our first booklet was called For Patent Attorney and Trademark Specialists, and this is for everybody else. So it's all the people that make the IP sector work. So that's people who work in formalities, kind of regulators. Some people might call themselves paralegals. It might be trainee people, secretaries, and everybody else who's in the kind of support roles that make the work work. And so once again, we've worked closely with people in those roles to give us examples of what are the issues. And interestingly, this booklet, I think, includes quite a lot more about the supervisory relationships and the managerial relationships and how to get those working well. Talks a bit more about bullying and harassment, which unfortunately is still common in lots of workplaces. Might not happen every day and it might not happen a lot, but when it does, it's corrosive. And so organisations really need to be able to stamp that out. So the booklet will be coming out in the autumn. We're very excited about that.
And have you had the opportunity to speak to people at different levels in IP organisations to help put that together? Is it something that practitioners have been involved in?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's got their quotes in it. They've written most. We've held some focus group virtually, and we've had a lot of help from your sister organisations at SITMA, and they've helped too with their different people from there. They call it the paralegals group there. We think that will complement our two other resources.
It is really helpful to get some guidance. So I have to say, I am just from the wrong generation. Like so many things on this podcast, I've been learning so much throughout this podcast, and I hope I've become a better person just from sitting through. And this is another example of where one gets.
I hope you've become a better person too.
Oh God, the only way was up. I'll have to say one of the things I have, and this is why booklets are really helpful, is that where if somebody came to me with a dodgy back or whatever, I'd say, oh, you better go and see a doctor because I definitely can't help you with that. I think there's a temptation to think, oh, I can help. Well, mental health, I can cheer someone up. Presumably that's not very helpful either.
Well, I think if you've got a bad back, it's still nice for people to be sympathetic and to ask if there's anything you can do. You can carry bags to the car and you can ask if people need to come in a bit later because they can't travel on the bus or whatever. So I think it is all right to be, having still drawing the parallel, but there is a point where you say, and have you seen anybody else about that? Have you seen it's okay to say, have you seen your GP, or is there somebody else who can help with this? So I think that's absolutely fine. The law care report that came out in the last few weeks was talking about the experience of people in law, but obviously that includes a lot of people in the IP sector, saying that burnout is still very common, people not feeling safe at work to speak up, and that they did still feel a very large number. They were saying 1 in 5 people had felt either bullied or harassed or discriminated against in the time of their survey, which was 4 months in the beginning of this year. So, that's a staggeringly high number. And so they're campaigning now to really help us think about ways of changing the workplace culture, and they're really asking organisations to think about ways of challenging the long hours culture, thinking about whether having all your targets billable is the healthiest way to go, and think very radically about doing things very differently, alongside doing things that we've been doing for some time, which is increasing the amount of training, increasing the amount of supervision, so that we're really not still talking about the same thing in 3 years' time or 6 years' time. Really try and make a difference.
Burnout one is really interesting. I think that's obviously going to be very relevant in something like the legal sector. I think the patent sector, luckily, our little area is less burnouty, or it's less pressured than a number of environments. And we saw some horror stories from banking recently about the hours expectations and a really simple mentality, which is, well, I had to do it back in my day. So it's part of it's somewhere between that's how you learn and the cycle of abuse. And I think it tends personally more to the cycle of abuse, saying, well, I had to go through it, so do you. And I think that's a massive area where a lot of work's needed. People would deny there's a cycle of abuse, but they also need to understand that just exhausting people isn't necessarily actually training them.
Exhausting people isn't training them. And also people who are saying, I had to do it, are often come from a particular group, and it's not a very diverse group. And so they're probably not putting themselves in the position, somebody from, say, circumstances where they're having to care for children, or, we saw so many parents having to homeschool children during COVID, or, continuing to have to shield their loved ones if they were particularly vulnerable and so on. So having people say it wasn't like that in my day, there aren't many things at work where we can say it wasn't like that in my day. There weren't computers when my managers were first starting out. So for them saying it wasn't like that in my day is kind of irrelevant. And, this is the same, actually. I had a really interesting interview with the head of Linklaters, who was leaving, the chief exec, was saying that in some of their very high intensity kind of merger and acquisitions projects, where they've always assumed that everybody had to be available 24/7. They've switched it so that 1 or 2 people have to be available 24/7 at kind of crucial times. The rest of the people don't. Well, that seems a very sensible alteration, from outside. I don't know the detail of it, but it was a creative alternative solution to an age-old problem. So 1 or 2 people per project were still feeling very stressed out with the work hours, but not everybody. And it takes that sort of creativity, and part of the solution is always going to be to involve the people who are concerned. So involving the new people who want to work smarter, not harder, and who want to have a really exciting career. IP, I'm not in the IP sector, but it's, it looks really interesting and exciting, and it's attractive, and that's why people come into the sector.
June, do you think that some of the changes that we've seen throughout the pandemic, for example, let's take the working from home, working remotely aspect, which I know from everyone that I've spoken to, while some people are getting a little bit tired with it now and want to get back into offices and so on, for many people, it's been, particularly people with families and other commitments, it's been a godsend, really, to be able to work more flexibly. I've certainly, I think, reaped the benefits of it because I work at stupid o'clock in the morning. It's when I work best. But I was reading a piece this morning. It was a piece for specifically the association sector, so it doesn't immediately read across to IP. And it was about recruitment. And it's a survey that's just recently been done in membership. And the number one benefit that a new employee looks for is the ability to work flexibly and manage work home.
I think we're hearing that across the piece, aren't we? That there are lots of people who want the choice and want the flexibility of doing it. Now, young people, by and large, want to have more in real life contact. And actually, they need it with their trainers and supervisors. And they're the group who want to, paradoxically, they're the people who want to spend more time at home. So there has to be a balance struck. What's good for individuals, but also what's good for the ongoing development of the professional, the ongoing development of that service that's being provided. So it's a real challenge, I think, for organisations to get the balance? You know, do you have everybody coming in on one day so that you have whole team meeting, or do you have the whole thing staggered through the week, which might mean you need fewer desks and cheaper rental? You know, it's a hard one, but there's no one size fits all.
I was also thinking that I was thinking it because you know how Facebook comes back to bite you sometimes with pictures from the past. Well, I got a picture a few weeks back, and I don't know why, seeing as it was a bit previous, because it was about Movember. But a few years back, I grew the most ridiculous droopy moustache. Gwilym might remember it for Movember, and I'm thinking I've not done it for a few years. I probably ought to have a proper shave again and do something for Movember. So I might do that. But I know that you were saying in the build up to the podcast that there's stuff happening in November around IP.
There is. So IP Inclusive, that we work very closely with, we're delighted to work very closely with, are having a Movember event on 11th of November. So it's a virtual event at 12:30, and it's a panel event, and we've got two speakers, including Susie Bennett, who is our researcher, or she's a researcher at the University of Glasgow, and we're very happy at the charity to sponsor her or support her work in a small way. And she's researching into ways of preventing male suicide. So I think that would be a really great part of the panel. And then Penny Aspinwall, who's one of our trainers, is on the panel as well.
That sounds really interesting. Is there an expectation that you turn up with a moustache? Because the 11th.
I'm not going to.
I might struggle to have grown one by the 11th.
Well, I hope I'll struggle too. So we've got the booklet coming out. We've got the Movember thing coming up. If I may, I just want to also suggest that if anybody's interested in things that we've talked about today, if they come to our website at Jonathan's Voice and they'd like us to come to their organisation to help them think about ways of keeping the mental health agenda as fresh as possible, then I'm very happy to speak to people.
How do you help them do that? What sorts of activities might you do to help them do that?
So we've got two things. We previously always said that it's possible to arrange training. So that might be what used to be called lunchtime talks, but we're now saying, well, it's not a good idea to spend your lunchtime listening to a talk. So could it be we don't really want the after lunch talk, but, you know, a talk at some other point of the day where people are paid, not in their time, it's in work time, where they can learn about mental health or well-being and one guise or another. Or we can do whole day training for groups of line managers or supervisors or the top team direct. But the other thing that I'll be doing more of is offering a consultation package where we'd work with the people who are already, maybe the wellbeing committee or the people who already have started doing some work on wellbeing, and having a look at what are the next steps that would really make a difference. And so we're offering to meet people for a couple of hours straight away, and then to have a follow-up meeting in 6 months' time to see if they could, you know, if things that we've suggested have made an impact. We really think that the more that people can do, it's not only the right thing to do, but there's just stronger and stronger evidence coming through now that people get a real return on their investment.
Yeah.
So actually, if companies do this, the overall figure that's been quoted from 2019 research is that for every £1 spent, there's a £5 return on investment. So, you know, it's the right thing to do, but actually it's the business. It makes business sense to do it as well.
I thought Gwilym was just about to speak, so I paused.
I can if you want. I have one question. May I like one?
Yeah.
So you said, June, at the beginning, you mentioned the theme about how mental health it differs across different sectors and everything else. Mm-hmm. So presumably, I imagine that a useful part of training is going to be to get people recognizing that depending on who they're dealing with in their workforce, there's a enhanced probability that there might be mental health issues behind some of it. Is that a useful mindset to have, or is that just making too many assumptions? Are you profiling that way?
I think it's really helpful to be aware that it could be significant, and then to ask questions. Just because you know that somebody might come from a different ethnic group from you, or be a different gender from you, or have different age children from you, or no children, or whatever, it doesn't signify anything. It's just that you might be careful about the way that you ask the questions, and might be really interested in the way that you're listening to the answer. So yes, it is part of this is why it matters, but actually you approach every single person afresh with I I don't know what it's like for you. Can you help me understand whether this is something that's made a difference or is making a difference, or is this something that I need to be aware of? Can you help me understand it? One of the things that the IP Inclusive organisation is doing so well is promoting the way that we should think about diversity inclusivity a lot more. They've introduced this IP pledge. I don't know if you've spoken about it on the podcast.
Gwilym and I were early adopters.
Excellent. Well, you know about it. And, the arrangement there is that individuals sign up to say that they will take small and important steps to make sure that the workplace is as inclusive as it can be. And it doesn't mention mental health explicitly, but it's, under the umbrella of that part of what we might be doing, we're signing up as the IP pledgee, I don't know if that's a word, is that you will take steps, to call out things that seem to be bad for our mental health, being good allies for people who seem to be struggling with their mental health, really being supportive of the initiatives that are going to promote really good working practices. So, I'd encourage anybody to have a look at the IP Inclusive Pledge. And on the website, there's a list, you can see your name, but the list of other people and other organisations have signed up. Have a look to see who else in your organisation has signed up.
It's a great initiative. I was quite pleased, proud, don't know what the right word is. Gwilym and I were at a little event a couple of weeks ago. We might have won an award. I don't know whether you've heard.
We really should be mentioning this more.
Yeah,
we think otherwise our listeners aren't going to know this happened.
But while I was waiting for Gwilym to turn up, Gwilym sort of stayed in the pub while I went and got myself ready. So was just a little bit late arriving at the
I had to get the
ceremony.
nerve up to wear that jacket. Yes.
Get the nerve being sufficient alcohol, yeah. But whilst I was waiting, two chief execs from two entirely different membership sectors came up to me, and they both asked exactly the same question without knowing that they were doing it. And that was, we've seen this IP Inclusive Pledge. Would you have any objections if we took a look at it and see if we could adopt it for our sectors? And it's like,
how amazing.
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
I must feed that back to Andrea, because it clearly we're reaching outside of the IP space, and others are seeing it as best practice now, which is great.
And thank you.
Yes, I think it goes really well with the IP Charter, which organisations had signed a few years back. But this is really making it, it makes it all of our business. It's a personal statement of what we individually are going to do. It's great.
I was going to say thanks for the plug actually as well on that, because IP Inclusive, and I think it's originally called Senior Leaders in IP. The idea being that you've got to do some stuff from the kind of from the decision makers. There's another meeting coming up, I can't remember when, but it's in the next few weeks. And it's been identified that, the pledge is fantastic, but to get that sense of movement and progression, time for a bit of action now as well. So that's what we're going to be looking at next, which is really exciting. Thank you for the plug. Thank you for knowing about it. Exciting that it's getting out there. So cool.
No, that's great. And certainly one of the things on my list of things to do is to approach those organisations that are pledged, or the people in the organisations who are pledged, to see if they would like anything that we have to offer from Jonathan's Voice. And we'd be very happy to help.
Well, June, our time is nearly up. Thank you for coming and sharing your expertise with us again. Always a pleasure to have you on. Let me just see if I've got the my 4 takeaways. The 4 things that I've got from this are November the 11th. The IP Inclusive event within Movember, with a focus on men's mental health and the issue around suicide, which is really important that we talk about that. The booklet that's coming out for the IP support staff in whatever role they might have. And I think it's really important for senior folk to get hold of that and to take a look at the sorts of things that they ought to be doing. You talked about the kinds of things that Jonathan's Voice can do to help keep mental health fresh and kind of open and obvious and aware in IP organisations. And importantly, you directed us to the Jonathan's Voice website as a general place to go for any help or support that we might need. I think those were the 4 biggies for me. So thank you for your time. Gwilym, as ever, thanks for popping by, mate.
Always happy to be there.
You must wear the jacket next time. And for us, that's a wrap. Bye.
Thank you so much. Cheerio.